Well, good evening everyone and welcome to our sixth webinar in this series, which is focusing on a safe return to judo. And I'm pleased to say this evening we have our performance team with us, or three of our performance team with us, to take you through a presentation that will look at how they intend to return safely to judo. And rather than participants tonight, we're talking about fighters and a return to fighting summer 2020. So the panelists tonight, firstly we have Karen Roberts, who is head of our performance operations within the elite performance team. We also have David Hart, who is a lead physio, and he's been working with Karen quite closely with the DCMS and UK sport to ensure that, from an athlete point of view, they return safely to the sport. And we also have here tonight Tim Ellis, who is the performance pathway manager. He looks after England talent, but also the other home nations from a talent pathway perspective. So that's enough from me at the moment. All I would like to say before I move on is at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A box where you can ask some questions. Now we're going to answer the questions at the end. We will ask the panelists to reply to you. We may not get through all the questions, but what I do ask is you keep them as short and as brief as possible, because it's quite difficult to read screeds where the questions are too long. So if you can keep them quite succinct. So without further ado, I will hand over to Karen Roberts, Head of Performance Operations. Over to you, Karen.
Thanks, Joyce. Apologies for my attire, but I am at the Centre of Excellence at the moment, and we've got the last group of fighters just in the gym. So as you'll see, this is it, living and breathing, returning to training for the fighters here. I guess I'm just going to ask Tim just to share the next slide and just talk around this a little bit, because hopefully as we talk through what our return to training strategy has been, this kind of gives you our guiding lights, if you like. I probably should say that when I think back to March, when this all started, we sat in the GK room next door, probably quite naively planning probably a bit of a 2-week break before we'd come back to training. And I think it was a very frank discussion with our EIS Chief Medical Officer, who pointed out that this was quite a serious event that was about to unfold in our country. And we made the call there and then that we would shut immediately and send everyone home. And that was slightly ahead, about a week ahead for the rest of the sporting community. And British Judo has been applauded for that. It's given us more time and more ability to consider all the different situations in front of us as we progressed. That day, we definitely considered what our key principles needed to be. And in the room that day, we knew that we're British Judo, but at that time we shifted from Judo to being British. And we realised our commitment needed to be to the successful implementation of the COVID strategy across the country. And that was obviously a global strategy, but also the duty of care to our team. We needed to make sure we put them first. That was protecting our fighters' families, our staff and our staff's families. So these were then the key principles we started to make our decisions on as we move forward, and we still do now. These are our guiding lights. But we still know that in the back of our minds, we need to prepare our fighters physically and mentally for competition. That day will be coming again, and we're looking forward to it. We still don't have clear direction of where that is from the IJF. But we're working towards a strategy now that makes sure we fulfill that, whilst making sure we maintain those first few principles along the way. And then the final part of that is the mitigation of risk. We are not eliminating risk. If we were, then we would be definitely flying around the world right now, offering advice to every government. We are mitigating risk. We're looking at our situation, and we're trying to employ the best factors we can to keep our fighters safe and our staff safe. I think the other thing that has been guiding us through this is just to make sure that we never take a step backwards. So we're being very careful and considered in the actions we take, so that the fighters continually feel like they're progressing. They've had it long enough now feeling stagnant. We don't want to return to that, and we want to constantly feel like they're progressing. And we've seen situations in other sports that have gone back a little bit quicker and then had to return back to other earlier stages because of the lessons that they've learned. We've been fortunate enough to learn those lessons along the way. So quite quickly, once we'd sent everyone home, we labelled it the off-season programme, and it was just a way of saying, right, we're not in season now, we're off-season, get home. But we realised quite quickly that our fighters needed guidance, so we created the weekly structure and the WhatsApp groups for communicating. I'm sure you've all been using this. We did also realise that there was almost too much noise at some points, that we were putting in too much structure, so we stripped it back and we just created the one message, one programme. The problem is, as soon as we get to thinking about the one focus, and I'll come on to that again in a moment and hand over to Dave when I do so. For the off-season programme, we quickly realised that this was an opportunity. We needed to frame it as an opportunity for the fighters to physically and mentally regenerate. This wasn't an opportunity we expected. We expected to be going full on into Tokyo, but we needed to use the time that we had effectively. Tim, I'm just on the next slide now. So we went full in with what we thought would be a reasonable programme that we could deliver during this time. But quite quickly, through the conversations that we were having with performance lifestyle support and with the coaches and with all of the other members of the team, the one focus actually was quite tricky, because the one focus, which is normally our major events, wasn't there. And that's when we started to reflect on actually what do we need to do to preserve the fighters at this point. Dave, if you go on to the next slide now.
Thanks, Karen, and good evening, everybody. So, as Karen said, we decided to step away from the group, from the group of fighters and the staff, to just give everyone a bit of breathing space, really. We recognised that sport was taking a back seat to everything else that was going on, and it represented some time to re-engage with family, volunteer with the NHS, do some community support work. Obviously, for the fighters, they still had to understand that they were elite fighters, they were elite athletes, and they had to live that lifestyle. But we afforded them the responsibility for themselves, and we took a step back from them. It gave a number of them to engage with courses, continue university work, and quite a few of them engaged in community initiatives as well. So the initial management was to say, do you know what, there's more to life than judo just now, so go ahead and do what you need to do for yourself. We were available to them at all times, but it was very much a case of, you contact us if you need us, and we'll be just keeping in touch with you on much more of a distant basis than what they were used to. If you move on, please, Tim. So there was an extensive consultation period that preceded what you see on the screen now. That was with the English Institute of Sport and UK Sport. We really wanted to understand how the government guidelines for elite sport were to be implemented within the high performance system. You know, we recognised straight away that we haven't got all the skills and abilities to deal with this, and the power of the collective, that being the wider sporting community, of which I think there's around 22 sports in our network. So there's an awful lot of knowledge there, and we utilised it because simply we weren't prepared to deal with it on our own. The plan was absolutely to mitigate the risk of COVID-19 as much as possible. But as Karen said, there's a definite opportunity to get ready to fight again at the end of all this. Quite often, our ideal training structure is interrupted with the global IJF calendar, and obviously, particularly for those guys who are due to compete at games in the near future, it takes over, and it means that quite often gains that you can make in fitness get interrupted by travel and competition. So we firstly wanted to minimise the loss of fitness during this phase, and we did that with a remote training program. So it was commonplace for the weeks leading up to the 20th of July, which was the week when we returned to contact training. all the weeks prior to that, it was commonplace for a coach to lead a session online through Zoom or an equivalent, and it was, you know, using bands, etc., to do as much as we could to make sure that the floor in the fitness of the group of fighters didn't drop to too low a level, so that we could get them back up to speed as quick as possible, and can answer some questions in a bit about how we did that in a bit more detail. Once we're back at the centre from the 20th of July onwards, it's all about building up gradually towards a position where we're ready to fight again. Now, along the way, prior to re-engaging with the centre and with colleagues, we did a video call, and that was with each fighter individually and each member of staff, and then there was a member of the coaching team and a member of the leadership team on the call. And the purpose of that call was just to make sure that the person returning was comfortable, that they were comfortable with the notion that this was going to generate more risk for them and for their family, because undoubtedly judo is probably the sport which has the greatest degree of contact. The risk of transmission of COVID-19 is higher in our sport than it is for any other, for obvious reasons, just with how close you have to get to one another. So there are still actually a few fighters who haven't opted back into the programme for personal reasons, such as shielding a family member, and we're completely supportive of that. There's been absolutely no judgment of any individual who didn't want to return to the centre. And once they'd expressed a desire to come back, we then we did a bit of a screening process to protect them and us as a programme, and that was in the form of a questionnaire where we're looking to ascertain the risk to them, the risk to their family, but also any risk they might pose to the programme due to, for example, recent international travel or working commitments which may have exposed them to the virus. So there was a definite risk-averse strategy across the board prior to coming back into the centre. We absolutely don't want to have any cases in the programme if possible. Now, we can only mitigate that risk to a degree, but we think we did that pretty well through this process. Next slide, please, Tim. So one of the ways, and you know, it's getting down to the practicality of things now, that we've set up a one-way system at the centre. The whole purpose of that is to avoid breaching social distancing. Now, although the government guidelines dictate that 1 metre is the distance to be observed, we're maintaining a 2 metre distancing policy where possible. If I'm honest, there've been a few occasions where back at the centre already, we've had to remind one another, just because you revert back to habit. We're all friends, we're all used to working close to one another. And as judo coaches in particular, you know, obviously a very hands-on tactile group, and we do have to constantly remind each other because we're human and we make mistakes. But what happens is when the fighter arrives, they have to, first of all, they will have completed an online questionnaire indicating that neither themselves or anyone in their household has any symptoms of COVID-19. They also have a temperature check. Once we establish that everything's okay from that point of view, they're permitted into the centre. And as you can see on there, the white arrows at the bottom, for those of you that have been to the training centre in Walsall, that's the main door. They enter in through the main entrance. They take a left into the dojo. If they need to use the toilet, they have to go following the arrows all the way around to the outside of the building before coming back in, just to, you know, alleviate the risk of people being in close contact. The benches at the side of the dojo, they're allocated for each group as well, so that they're not sharing sitting areas. Things like medical tape, the guys have to apply themselves rather than a physio do it for them. And again, they've got their own set of equipment that only they use. When they go down to the gym, there's a cleaning protocol as well, is what I was going to say. So we make sure the centre's clean at all times, and any equipment that has been used, whether that's dojo mat or equipment in the strength and conditioning facility, it's cleaned before the next group come in. And I'll talk a little bit more about the process on the next slide. Okay. So it's really important that the guys turn up on time. This isn't discipline for discipline's sake. This is to make sure that any of the processes that I've just mentioned there in terms of checking questionnaires are being filled in, assessing the temperature of individuals. It's making sure that we've got plenty of time to do that. If they're late, they don't turn up. We had a case this morning where one of the fighters phoned to say, look, I'm stuck in traffic, I'm running a bit late. I know, I'm just going to turn my car around, but I'm letting you know. We've got zero tolerance on lateness for that reason. They arrive in their kit that they wear underneath their judo gi. So that would typically be shorts and t-shirts, stuff that they would probably wear for conditioning and strength work, that they can just slip their judo kit over the top of, so that there's a minimal level of getting changed and the need to use any changing facilities. As I say, they do their questionnaire and the temperature check, and they follow a one-way system. Each fighter has been allocated their own bottle of hand sanitizer, but in addition to that, we've got plenty of wall-mounted hand sanitizers as well. We've been informed that across the high performance system that it's estimated that hand hygiene represents 80% of what you can do in terms of mitigating risk. All the rest of it has a much smaller contribution. So within clubs, hand hygiene has been from the start and very much remains moving forward the absolute minimum, but also the essential element to mitigating the risk of the spread of the virus. When they do enter the dojo area, as I said, they've got their own designated bench area, and we've allocated half of the dojo to 2 groups and half of the dojo to another 2 groups. So if I just discuss the groups as well, we've got 38 fighters within the cohort, and we've split them into 4 groups. The reason for that is if we have a positive case of coronavirus within one of the groups, then we only need to isolate a quarter of the program. So for that quarter of the program, until we manage the situation, it would only be that smaller number that would have to leave and not train for a period of time, whilst the rest of the program can continue to train. So the reason why the dojo is split in half is so that if group 1, for example, uses one half of the dojo, we can clean that and give it some drying time, whilst group 2 come in to use the opposite half of the dojo, and that's working quite well. The process that we're using is simple, but it's a case of hoovering the mats, and then we've got some fogging equipment which sprays a screen detergent over the mat, so that it's it's as clean as we can possibly have it, ready for the next group coming in. There's an absolute limit of 2 hours, and that's to make sure that there's no crossover of the groups. So if group 1 finish in the judo session, they finish in the dojo, they go down to the strength and conditioning area. There's time to clean both areas before leaving, and then there's a good gap of time before the next group come in. As I mentioned, the dojo's cleaned, the gym's cleaned, hand hygiene's paramount. When the next group enter the building, it's completely clean, as it was for the group before them. So we go again. We reinforce the importance of hand hygiene when they leave the centre, take a shower as soon as they get home, and clean training kit each day that they come in. Now, one consideration is that in order to remove the potential of virus being on any clothing, it needs to be at a 60-degree wash. Judogi doesn't like being washed at that temperature. It's probably going to shrink, but it's a necessary evil, and it might be during this time that we get through a little bit more kit than what we would normally, but it's important for the reasons of eliminating the virus, so that there's probably going to be an increased demand on training kit as well, which is a bit of a consideration. Next slide, please, Tim. So I've talked a lot so far about COVID risk mitigation, but obviously we're there to train, and the opportunity that we have is an uninterrupted block of training ahead of when competition starts again. And we don't know when competition is going to be for definite. We've got a rough idea that it's possibly going to be late autumn when we start to see some international competition become available to us. So we've allocated a 10-week block of contact training. And as you can see on the screen there, we've named the first 3 weeks as regroup. we think that there's a, one of the main benefits of being a centralized program is the group and team dynamic that exists, and it's probably something that all of our fighters, like they will have done in clubs around the country, they simply missed each other, missed that interaction, missed having the ability to train with one another, something that they normally thrive on. So we're really keen to support them simply mixing with one another, and the judo is going to build up over time. So we're currently in week 2, and within week 2 there are only going to be 2 randori sessions. There's one Newaza, one Tachiwaza session, and the intensity is of a lower level than it will be as the program moves on. So you can see there in the first week it was a 3-day training week, the second week is a 4-day training week, and the third week is a 5-day training week, where the judo builds up and the strength and conditioning starts to build as well. But it's all at a fairly low level. It's interesting though, because even at a low intensity, there's quite a lot of reported soreness amongst the group. And I think it just re-emphasizes something that we all already know, that there's nothing quite like the feel of judo and the nature of the training. There's, you can't replicate that with running and cycling and doing exercise in your back garden. You need to get used to taking the hits and throwing and being thrown, and as a result there's, probably expect quite a bit of soreness when groups start to train again. Weeks 4 and 5 see us move to what we've called the build phase. It also extends into week 6 and 7. Now during that phase, randori's becoming more often, and the intensity of it is certainly increasing as well. You can see there by week 5 on the Wednesday, for example, we've got a session there that's wrestling, and there's a number 8 by it, and that's because the 8 relates to the intensity. So that's an 8 out of 10 intensity, whereas in weeks 1 and 2 the intensity is down at 6. So not only is there more judo, but it's getting more intense. And in this phase as well is when we're going to start to, the fighters are going to be lifting heavier weights and start to feel like this is more of a typical training week. There's also Saturday sessions start within this phase as well. So we've moved to a 6-day training week just to try and spread that increased load over a greater number of days. Next slide, please, Tim. So this continues in terms of developing the volume of training right the way up until I think we get to week 8, where we have our peak, and we're looking. I'm going to discuss how we're building the randori load specifically, but at this point we're looking to try and replicate what it would be like on a global randori camp, which typically is a higher load than it is when we're back at home. So we peak in terms of volume by week 7 and 8. Weeks 9 and 10, we're adding segmented randori. It's much more explosive. There's pressure training sessions in there as well. So we've gone from very much technical. There's some play randori. It's open practice. There's very little resistance from the training partners. When we get to weeks 9 and 10, it's explosive. It's high intensity, and as a result, we're probably actually going to reduce the overall amount of randori they do, as we look to almost give them a bit of a peak towards the potential of competition. As I say, towards late autumn. On the next slide, Tim, I think we've got the randori load planner. Okay, and this is really simple. If you focus on the box with the red and green columns, you can see that the green columns represent the maximum number of randori training minutes, and the red indicates the minimum level of randori training minutes. You can see that by week 8 it peaks to 200, which equates to 40 minutes of randori a day, which, like if we take an example of a camp like Mittersill in January, it's that kind of numbers that we see our guys expose themselves to. So we want to ensure that we're getting back up to that sort of level. So in effect, we're ready for a training camp, and we're ready to fight. Excuse me. So I think that probably gives a basic overview of how we progress the randori load. Why we do it like this is probably more important, because this is just one way of doing it. I don't think I would suggest that we know everything about how to get this right. As I say, we've never had this opportunity before in terms of building up a level of training so that we're ready to compete uninterrupted with competition. This is completely new. So despite the fact that we've spent a long time planning this, we've got our heads together as a science and medicine and coaching team, and we think we've got the best version. We'd probably be very open to other suggestions, for improvements, in the future. This isn't necessarily the best model. We'll experience it, and then we'll be able to learn from it. There's also, I've always thought that the way the international calendar is set up, it doesn't allow for recovery and a rebuilding of fitness. And as a result, I think that the risk of injury in particular on the global judo circuit is really high. I don't think we allow ourselves as a sport the chance to recover, and I wonder if we do learn some lessons from this experience, where as a British team, if we try and impose more of a seasonal spread so that we have some downtime and a chance to build fitness again. I've got a suspicion that we're going to actually feel some real benefits of this, and it could make for better games next year for us. But I suppose we'll have to wait and see. I think that's it from me for now.
Thanks, Dave. So I come back to this because I wanted just to draw attention that these principles still remain in place for us. And that duty of care to our team, whilst we've been thinking about this return to competition one day, is now around giving them the best possible preparation and that slow build to make sure that we don't see what we have seen in other sports, which has been injury spikes, and then people not able to be training despite the risk mitigation being achieved. So the duty of care to our team now during this phase is slightly different to how we were approaching it in previous months, which was purely around COVID. Now this is about duty of care around preparing our fighters for the best standards that we can, and we will continue to look and learn and adapt to do that. That's basically how the last 4 months have panned out. As we've gained more information and we've learned more, we've adapted what we've done, and we've been learning across other sports along the way, and across other countries along the way as well. So I think moving forwards, as you get to that exciting stage where hopefully we'll be getting back to some normal judo at some point, think about what the key principles are for you and your clubs, and be able to base your decisions around that way, and be looking towards that progression. We're still priding ourselves as one of the only sports that have not taken a step back. We've progressed carefully and strongly, and we've got our fighters back training together safely.
Thank you, everyone. Sorry, I was just having a little problem unmuting myself there. Evening, everyone, as well. My name's Tim, Performance Pathway Manager. I've met some of you, but probably not all of you. I'm just going to give you a little bit of an overview of what we're thinking in the talent pathway, home nations, and a little bit more specifically the England programme, in terms of when we return to training and building towards competition as a talent pathway. It's not as comprehensive as the GB process, but we'll be looking to learn from the centralised programme as much as possible, and going along some of their key principles of building intensity and volume in a slow process, but whilst working with you all here. So please feel free. This is an opportunity at the moment to really work together with you guys to understand how we help the fighters as best as possible during this stage. One thing that we've been very, very clear about as a group of home nations, when we've been meeting regularly over this time via Zoom or Skype, is that we don't want to be pulling the fighters in multiple directions when trying to return. We felt that the worst thing that we could do would be to say they've got a program running with you, and we as a Home Nation program or a GB program come in and say we want them doing this, that or the other, because A, it wouldn't be helpful to them as a person, and B, we're more likely to increase the risk of injury. So we felt it was really important we work together and with the best intentions of the fighter in hand. And the other principle is building towards 2021. We felt that likelihood is world-class programs looking at kind of 6 weeks to get back to full fitness. If that's a full-time fighter, it will probably take someone that's doing it part-time or with school and bits and pieces that get in the way. It's more like 8 to 10 weeks. So it could be quite a long process to get back to full fitness. And we want to make sure that that means this 2020, it's not quite a write-off, but you know, it's to be really, really considerate that we're building for competition next year and making sure that we're helping the fighters gain experiences that they may have missed out on this year. You know, they've missed a hell of a lot of competition, both domestically and internationally, as well as missing training camps domestically and internationally. So we want to make sure that we're helping them take advantage of the learning experiences that will come their way, and try and fast track that. What that doesn't mean is getting them back on the mat and just doing as much with them as possible. But we're still figuring out exactly what those opportunities are. So we don't have all the answers, and that's where we're really keen again to work with you guys. As you can see on the top, the process we've felt is very much club, get them back in their clubs first, and then to Home Nation, and then to GB. There may be little crossovers in this. We understand that some of the clubs you're not coming back for quite a long time, and there may be a little crossover here and there between Home Nation and GB, but these are the main sort of principles that we're looking at. So hopefully this sort of makes sense, and you've seen some of this. This along the bottom here is the phases that have been put out by Sports Directorate and Joyce's department about return to training in the clubs, and we've tried to understand how we as Home Nations might fit within that. This is more specifically with the England programme here. We understand that there are differences in the Home Nations, and you know that although we're all following sort of the same thought processes, there will be slight differences. But essentially, this phase 1, phase 2, 3, it's more about us as programs checking in with club coaches and checking in with the fighters to make sure that we're kind of keeping the relationships more than anything, learning what you guys are doing, that will help inform what we do when we come back into Home Nation programs. Because I think, as I've mentioned before, we don't want to just kind of set a Home Nation talent program camp and start beasting the fighters before they're ready. You know, we want to make sure that it's a well thought out plan that takes into consideration their fitness levels when they come in. We realise that there'll be a bandwidth of fitness between some of those that, you know, they come back and haven't had the opportunity to do as much as some of the others, whether that be full-on randori or training at home, physical fitness wise and conditioning wise. We're looking at actually returning to sessions when it is time for randori, and essentially it says post social distancing. I don't know if there'll ever be a post social distancing in the near future, but essentially once we are allowed as a wider community to get back on the mat and have randori in groups, whatever size that may be, that's when we'll look to start bringing back talent program sessions. What they look like, we don't necessarily know yet, but we are starting to build a plan. I know Simon Moss is on the call at the moment, who's part of the team that's putting together the England return to training process. And we've discussed definitely the opportunity to go regionally before we go nationally, potentially. And we've also discussed that it may be smaller groups like the GB program has done when it comes to lightweight girls, heavyweight girls, lightweight men, heavyweight men, is splits, for example, just so that we decrease and mitigate the risk of passing the virus throughout groups. And we've also discussed the risk of overnight camps. So the example of not necessarily using residential camps during this time, and not necessarily having things such as food and bits and pieces as a risk. All these minimizing social interaction, basically. And the other sort of thought processes that we have thought about is that it's definitely a block of training like the World Class Programme have been doing, and it's looking to work towards international competition. So what we've felt is that going away internationally too soon would be remiss of us, basically, and we would put the fighters at unnecessary risk, both in terms of infection from the virus, but also injury. Just like returning from an injury, a big injury previously, you wouldn't necessarily bring a fighter back and go full on straight away. We feel that we should be building them up domestically before we take them abroad, and we should be really considerate once we do take them abroad, whenever that may be, to really phase the return in so that we're not kind of going in too hard. And I think there's also a note that we've thought about as a group, and I've thought about as a group. I don't know if you guys have been out having a look around at places, that there is a difference between how certain establishments are managing risk. We as programs need to understand what our cutoff point is when we go to a place and we are not happy with the level of mitigation against the risks that are there. For example, if you go away and there's hundreds of people on the mat, not social distancing happening, not hand sanitizer around, all of those sort of things, how happy are we to stay in a training environment when we're not comfortable with the processes in place, and at what point would we turn away for the best interests health-wise for our fighters? I think that's a really important consideration to make sure that we are doing the best for their health-wise. Just moving on, this is my sort of last slide, and it's important considerations for us. As I've said, we're not at the place where we have comprehensive return to training programs as Karen and Dave have presented previously, and we'll be looking to get to sort of that stage, and we're starting to put those plans in place. But we've thought a lot about competitions and how we bring back competitions. So whether it's building from regional competition first, home nation, British champs, and when we get to European Cups, we know that they'll look different. So whether we start running in-house competitions with less parents, or just in terms of during our own training camps, so that we make sure that the fighters are getting as much opportunity as possible. We've also thought at home nation level that if we are not able to go abroad, how do we make sure that our very best fighters get the opportunity to be really stretched, and using our domestic resource as best we can. For example, if you're the top cadet, how do we expose you to fighting against juniors or seniors, and things like that. Same with pre-cadets as well. We've thought about the training camps, as I mentioned previously. Do we go regional or national, domestic versus international as well? How do we make sure that we manage the risk when we go internationally? The accommodation aspect, it's likely before we have a training camp, we are looking at potentially having an ONST first, so that the idea being that there will be a very big training camp happening, so that there is lots of risk assessments in place, and then as a program, specifically England, it'll be easier to bring the risk assessments into place, if that makes sense. We're not building our own risk assessments, we have one and we scale it down for smaller camps. if that makes sense. One consideration we've really thought about, and what we've really said, is that although we've missed opportunities and fighters have missed experiences over these last few months that others would have had, or they might have had otherwise, to really help development. And there's two real key points for us, which is that cadet to junior transition, as well as that junior to senior transition being really hard. We don't know the answer to these yet. We just know that they're really important. And it's really hard to know the answer just yet until we know what camps and competitions will be in place. So as I've mentioned at the start, one of the key principles is working with you guys, and we'll really want to make sure we do work with you guys. So again, not wanting to drop Simon in it, but he's also coming up with some plans that we can take, so first year juniors away, to sort of build them into that, from that transition from cadet to junior, and make sure that they're getting similar experiences. Because what we do know is that we can't necessarily carbon copy what a first year junior's competition structure would have been previously. They might have to kind of do events or competitions that are slightly different, maybe easier, or they might have to do more training camps over competitions potentially. These are all things that we need to think about. And then I mentioned preparation for 2021. That doesn't just go for the fighters, that goes for us as squads. It's going to be really hard to select if we haven't had any competitions and we haven't seen people for 12 months. What we are clear on is that there is a likelihood we're going to have to be more inclusive in certain areas, especially domestically. But I say more inclusive. This is obviously with the caveat of where budget allows. And we obviously select for international competition quite a lot. What that looks like, there is a couple of schools of thought that we're exploring, whether we open a couple of international competitions up to be a bit of a free-for-all, or whether we kind of select from training camps and in-house competitions that we run at training camps home nationwide. And that obviously that being more inclusive is all about sort of making sure that we retain enough people, as many people as possible as well. I realise as before I kind of say thank you and I invite questions, I realise that I've talked a lot about home nations there, not necessarily GB and EDS. And it's just as a note, I think GB EDS is definitely following the same sort of principles. Most definitely the part-time semi-centralised programme will sort of return after home nations have had an opportunity to return. The programme for next year will again probably look to be more inclusive with the squad that we selected this year. What that looks like exactly, we don't know. What we do know is that we have paused full-time applications, and we've paused bringing people on to the full-time programme to 2021 at the earliest. And I say at the earliest because we don't know when that will be. Again, as everyone's sort of been hit with struggles in terms of budgets and stuff, we don't know what our struggles necessarily will be in terms of knock-on. And obviously it's expensive to bring fighters onto the programme. There is also the small consideration that the Olympic and Paralympic Games are next year, and the team's preparations for that is paramount, and ensuring that their preparation comes first, so that if we need to bring people in, we need to ensure that it doesn't kind of put that at risk. So it may be that once we've considered it, is that it might not be January, it might be February, it might be March, or it might even be September, October, November. We don't know yet. What we do know is that we have a number of fighters that are looking to come and work and study in the West Midlands area, specifically Birmingham, Walsall, Coventry, and we're really inviting and encouraging people to kind of get in contact and speak to us, because we would like to be able to invite them into train where they can. That is obviously dependent on COVID restrictions. So it may be that they are at university for a little while and then they're invited in at a later stage. But we would encourage anybody that is looking to do that to speak to us as soon as possible. We have got a few on a list, but that would just be a case of emailing myself. I think that is pretty much where we are. As I've said, if I'm aware there's people that are in Scotland listening at the moment, there's also people in Wales listening. There is slightly differences between each home nation, and you know, it's I'm sure I don't have to say this, but it's obviously everything is with the caveat of your government advice, and each home nation will be slightly different. For example, if England aren't looking to come back and do anything until randori is allowed, Wales are looking at doing outdoor training at some point in the near future. It depends on the size of your home nation squad and the restrictions that are in place. So specific questions on home nations I can try and answer, but it might be that I wait and go and find the answer from your home nation lead. But thank you very much from all three of us, and hopefully there are some questions.
Thanks, David, Karen and Tim. That was extremely interesting presentation, and it's gave us all food for thought, I think, tonight. And from my perspective, I think it will help the clubs out there as well that are dealing with recreational judo, as well as the more professional athletes. So we have three main questions tonight, which I'm surprised that I know a lot of you's out there, and I'm sure you've got plenty of questions, but we'll start with these three and maybe there'll be a few more come through. So the first question will go to you, Dave, sorry. And that is, have you been asking them, that will be the athletes, to use antiviral wipes on their feet as well as their hands before they step onto the mat? In their dojo, and this is Joe Nunn that's posed this question, they've found that using wipes are great because surprisingly the mats have been quite dirty after the sessions.
Okay, I'll answer that on two levels. I wouldn't disagree at all with cleaning feet before getting on the mat. I think this whole experience has taught us that we can be better with personal hygiene and how that could impose on someone else. I mean, things like athlete's foot and ringworm, for example, just skin conditions that we see quite a lot. I think we could do a lot more in terms of stopping the spread of those things, and that, you know, whether it's cleaning your feet, your hands, or the, you know, and definitely the mats after sessions. I think we could save ourselves a lot of trouble in just improving what we do in that regard. Have we done it now? No, we haven't. The reason why we're keeping it to the bare minimum in terms of what is essential to try and mitigate the risk of COVID-19. Now, the main areas of risk are respiratory droplets on hands and surfaces, and possibly through direct aerosol transmission, i.e. breathing, and the aerosol from your mouth passing directly into the nose and mouth of someone that's within a small distance from you. So we haven't done that, Joe, but I wouldn't disagree with it, although as part of the strategy, we've been really keen to make sure we nail the essentials, and asking the guys to clean their hands more is a change in itself. Adding feet and other aspects of hygiene to that, we haven't done. But as I say, I couldn't argue with you know the logic in doing that. But we haven't as part of this strategy, and at the moment it's only this strategy that we're focusing on. But that forward, absolutely.
Thanks for that, Dave. The next question's for Karen. It's from Lorna Seymour. And it's, are you able to recommend a temperature checker, please? Or would you expect the grassroots clubs to obtain them? And is there a questionnaire available on the website? So it's three questions in one, Karen. I know you've had a read at them, so.
Yeah, I'll do my best. So I just went and grabbed this from our front desk. This is the one that we're using at the moment. Other brands are available. Basically, it's a non-contact infrared thermometer. I'm sure you can Google them. We've been using this because that then keeps a safe social distance when we're taking the temperatures on arrival. In terms of whether or not you should get one, I mean, that is going to be down to your risk assessment and how you want to mitigate your risk as people are coming in. From what I understand from talking to the medical professionals, you know, Dave's on here now, having a good idea of people's temperature over a period of time gives us one of the best weapons we've got to know if they have an infection underlying the other questionnaires, which then comes on to the questionnaire piece. I think it's a great idea. We could share some of the questions that we ask, obviously with the caveat that there's an interpretation to the answers. So it would be making sure it's as straightforward as for a coach to use within the club setting. We've got the backup, fortunately, of our Chief Medical Officer, Joe Banks, who gets to review anything that we can't deal with. But there definitely are questions within our questionnaire that you could pick up and use, which are the same questions that you'll get asked if you go anywhere around symptoms. Have you experienced symptoms? Anyone in your household? And there's a time frame on that. How are you actually feeling in yourself? And then some exploratory on how you're feeling in yourself a bit further. But ultimately, the biggest thing that we're recording on that questionnaire is the temperature of the coach on arrival. The process is they take the temperature themselves. They need to go and advise the leadership team should there be any problems. The session will just be cancelled if their temperature is out of range. So the temperature is one of our biggest weapons. And I think early on, Dave, you brought to the team with a football background and being able to get lots of information from what was going on. Despite all the testing that's going on, the biggest weapons that we've got are the cleaning the hands and that constant data that we're collecting from the fighters to know actually how they're feeling and what their temperature is. So yes, we can maybe get something out to you guys around what we're doing with some interpretations, almost like a flow chart. If you ask this question, it's a yes or no about training, and make it as straightforward as possible. We'll share that.
I think if I can just answer that, Karen, the first question that our fighters have to answer each morning is, do you feel physically well and normal? If the answer to that is no, then they don't come in. So that could be, it could be a COVID symptom. So it could be a cough, it could be a fever, or it could be, I've got an upset stomach. We're aware of cases where there are less common symptoms, which are, you know, retrospectively being associated with COVID-19. So at the moment, because we're prioritising health over performance, if you're unsure, you just don't come in. And then what happens is we follow it up. So I think in the club environment, for example, that would be, if you don't feel well enough to train or you're concerned about your health in any way, don't come in. Let us know that you've contacted 111 for a bit of advice on it. Once they've told you, do you know what, you can carry on with that. That's not related to COVID. That's not a concern. That's just, you know, day to day. We all have times where we don't feel too well. But just put up a bit of a, you know, if each one of us is, whether we're athletes, whether we're staff, if we can all just put up a bit more of a barrier to the potential of it spreading, and that is, if I don't feel quite right today, then I'm going to keep away. And then as time moves on, we can develop some confidence. What we don't want to do is go, you know, move ahead of where we should be. And that is taking risks and almost making a decision for ourselves that, yeah, I should be okay. I just don't see at the moment that the risk outweighs the reward. Now, we know we want to get back training, but at the moment, even at the elite level, it's still not as important to stop the spread of the virus, because once it takes hold of a club or a elite training centre like ours, it's probably going to spread like wildfire. You know, we've seen whether it's whether it's the Israeli national judo team, whether it's a factory in Leicester. You see that once you get one or two cases, then the whole place gets affected. So my message is, if in doubt, then just sit the session out for the time being. And that goes to, you know, even if you're the one person that the whole session hinges on because you're the main organizer, it's only one session. Pause, take a bit of time to evaluate the situation, and then go ahead. And I think as long as everyone understands that that's the expectation, that sessions are probably going to get cancelled from time to time, then you know, you're not letting anyone down. In fact, quite the opposite. You're just looking after those people that you're responsible for.
If you guys don't mind, I'll add a little bit here in terms of the clubs and grassroots. There is an expectation that clubs do test the temperatures using an infrared thermometer, and they are available widely on the websites, on the website. And in terms of a questionnaire, we do have an athlete indemnity form that all players are expected to complete, and we're encouraging clubs to encourage athletes to do this before they come to the sessions and to send it electronically where they can. So you'll find that on British Judo's website under COVID-19 Hub. And then within that, it's a safe return to judo, and in there there's a whole load of documents that you'll find useful, hopefully. So, sorry for gate crashing that one. Okay, so the last question here again is from Joe Nunn, and this will be for you, Tim, and it's for the athletes that received international selections that were cancelled events. Will these be carried forward once the athlete is back to competition and fitness? And presuming they haven't changed age and weight group. So it's quite a big question there.
Yeah, no, it's an excellent question and one we have thought about. The short answer is no, but I suppose there's depends in there a little bit in terms of home nation wise. I couldn't speak necessarily for Scotland and Wales specifically, or Northern Ireland, just because that will be down to Gary Edwards, Ewan Burton, Stephen Abley, Mark Earle, Kieran Ward and Chloe Cohen in their selection policies. What we do want to make sure is that we provide opportunity for those that would have been able to get there anyway. So it might not be that your selection to that event is the same, but it is we are hoping, and I stress hoping, that we will be able to make sure that those that have missed out on international competitions receive something. That is dependent on how they return a little bit as well, and their kind of engagement in the programs when they return to training. You know, we fully expect that they might not return to training in full physical peak, because it is hard to do that, and the level of access to fitness equipment and level of time to get fit is different for everybody during this period of time. But when they are back on the mat, we're expecting kind of the same sort of level of commitment and bits and pieces like that in order to get a selection. When it comes to EDS, at the moment, there's a couple of different groups. The hope is that we'll be running in EDS as in a similar way to last year, in that, you know, there was juniors selected that would be having a selection document that was essentially, they all got kind of a couple of tournaments at the start of the year, and that would be whittled down throughout the year. And then there were some senior ones that they got a couple of selections. Currently, I don't know whether we'll honour that selection just yet, in terms of, well, it's cancelled. So the short answer is no, but again, we've highlighted those people because we see that there's potential in them. So my hope would be that we kind of are able to give them some opportunity somewhere. I hope that makes sense. And we'll be looking to speak to those fighters once we have got a full program in place, and once we've kind of know more about what competitions are available. As Dave said at the start, we don't know when that will be in terms of international competitions. We're hearing late autumn. Sometimes we've also heard 2021 for the very bigger competitions. That might mean that the smaller ones won't come back just yet. You know, similar to like cricket or football, the biggest competitions will come back first, and then the smaller ones seem to be left behind a little bit. So, you know, we're not sure what that will be. Things like the Cadet Europeans and stuff like that, we still want to kind of consider those, but the primary focus, as I said, is getting people back to fitness before we start going internationally or to competition.
Okay, thank you guys for that. There's not any more questions tonight, so Tim or Karen or Dave, do you want to give us a couple of words just before we go off? Any words of wisdom?
None of those, Joyce.
Neither do I, so.
I think the one thing that I think has given us strength through all of this is not to think that we had all the answers, and we continue not to have all the answers, but we try and make the best judgments we can. This is dictated by government guidelines, and judo is a part of that, and British Judo is a part of that, but we have to commit to getting our country back on its feet, and that's something we're all committed to, and making sure that whilst we're doing that, our fighters can get the best, safest preparation back to a state of readiness.
Okay, thanks. Dave?
We wouldn't have got to the position we're in dealing with it on our own. And I think what's really evident, I've only been associated with the sport for a few years now, but I think there's a real community out there, and I think make sure that we're sharing practice as much as possible, and in particular difficulties that we've had. I'm sure as British Judo we will help clubs and home nations as much as possible. But try and keep that community of practice going, because a problem that you face will undoubtedly be faced by someone else, and I think that we're gonna beat this by working together on it. And what we want to see in the near future is us all back to training and competing like we want to, but there's some obstacles to get over, and there's more chance of us doing that successfully if we can work together. So that would be my message. And we're reaching out all the time, for example, to other sports, just to find out what's going on. What have you got any good ideas around this matter? And it just helps so much not dealing with it on your own.
Thanks for that, Dave. Tim?
Only thing from me is again reiterating that we'll be looking to you guys for your help, information which would be really appreciated for when we as a pathway start to return. And yeah, just kind of please feel free to kind of contact one of us, whether it be myself or one of the home nation leads, to speak through anything that may help return to training. Because again, like we've all said, none of us are the experts in this. We're all kind of figuring out as we go, and you guys will have expertise from your clubs and your day jobs and experiences previously that could really help us. So again, please feel free to contact any one of us, and be really appreciated.
I would just like to finish by thanking the panellists for their input tonight, and to you guys for coming along this evening and joining in and supporting this webinar. And all I have to say now is have a good rest of the evening, and hope to see you around at competition and training as soon as possible, whenever that is. Good night or good evening. Right.
Thank you all.